What if one man's return could shift the global balance of power? As Donald Trump re-enters politics, the effects are felt far beyond US borders. In this video, we'll explore how Trump's return is influencing global alliances, economies, and international relations. Welcome to Curious Mind, where we explore the questions that shape our world. Today we dive into the seismic shifts in geopolitics and their future implications. We'll cover potential trade wars, military alliances, and the impact on global markets. Stick around as we analyze the effects of Trump's return on the international stage with data-driven insights. As Trump resumes his political journey, nations are adjusting their strategies. The big question is, how will his leadership differ from his previous term? We'll analyze key players like China, Russia, and the European Union, and their immediate reactions to Trump's return. For instance, how has Xi Jinping reacted? Reports indicate that China is strengthening its economic alliances in Asia, and with the BRICS countries preparing for possible renewed trade hostilities. NATO has intensified its military cooperation with Eastern European nations, anticipating potential shifts in US foreign policy. But before we dive deeper, we want to hear from you. How do you think Trump's return will affect global alliances? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'll feature insights from international relations experts discussing potential scenarios. Are we looking at a resurgence of nationalism, or a push for renewed diplomacy? Former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen warns that a shift in US policy could weaken collective security, while Trump allies argue his leadership may deter adversaries. To understand the significance of Trump's return, we'll revisit his first term. What major geopolitical shifts occurred then, and how might they inform our understanding of the current climate? We'll discuss the Abraham Accords and how they may set the stage for future negotiations, as well as the impact of the US-China trade war on global commerce. Considering Trump's previous term, what should he prioritize in his new approach to international relations? Let us know in the comments. And if you're finding this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more content that keeps you informed. Let's explore the economic impacts of Trump's policies both domestically and globally, and how his return could reshape global commerce, trade relations, and industry dynamics. Trump's return could reignite trade wars, especially with China. His first term saw aggressive tariffs against China, leading to the US-China trade war. Analysts predict a second term could bring a similar, or even more intense approach, especially with concerns about China's influence in intellectual property theft. Reports indicate China is strengthening ties with BRICS nations, anticipating new tariffs. Technology is a key area, where Trump could impose restrictions on Chinese companies like Huawei and TikTok, escalating tensions. We'll examine potential tariffs, their impact on global supply chains, and how industries reliant on Chinese manufacturing might adapt. While Trump's America First agenda has led to trade wars, it has also created opportunities for new trade deals. A return to power could prompt new bilateral agreements like a potential US-UK trade deal. Such deals could reshape economic relationships, benefiting US businesses, and impacting industries like agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and financial services. The success of these deals will depend on whether Trump prioritizes protectionism or more open trade. There could also be moves to renegotiate NAFTA, now USMCA, or form new agreements with non-EU countries. The focus on China could lead to attempts to decouple trade, favoring American manufacturing and expanding trade with India or Southeast Asia. This could create new regional trade blocs, altering global commerce. We'll explore the sectors most likely to be affected by these changes. Agriculture is a major focus, with Trump's tariffs significantly impacting US farmers. Midwest farmers, especially in Iowa and Nebraska, are still recovering from the trade war. What might a second term bring? More tariffs on agricultural exports or new subsidies to help American farmers adjust to a tougher global trade environment? In technology, Trump's stance on Chinese tech firms could lead to more restrictions as Silicon Valley navigates the complex relationship with China. Companies like Apple and Google could face new regulatory pressures and supply chain disruptions. However, Trump could also push for a more America First tech policy, encouraging US-based tech firms to dominate the global market. In manufacturing, Trump's emphasis on reshoring jobs and his Buy American agenda could drive US investment back into domestic production. This would benefit sectors like steel, automotive, and machinery, but also could create frictions with global partners, particularly in emerging markets. How will companies respond to these pressures? We'll discuss how industries may brace for disruptions, and how they can adapt to Trump's trade policies. We'll analyze recent economic indicators such as stock market trends and consumer confidence reports. For instance, early 2025 data from the Federal Reserve suggests uncertainty among investors, with markets fluctuating based on Trump's policy announcements. This uncertainty could be both an opportunity and a risk for global markets. Some industries may benefit from his policies, while others, particularly those dependent on international trade, could suffer. Recent trends show that major markets in Asia, Europe, and Latin America are waiting for signals from the US to gauge how to adjust their own trade strategies. While some businesses are optimistic about the potential for a renewed focus on US manufacturing, others are cautious, fearing trade barriers and tariff wars. To understand the potential long-term impacts, we'll include insights from economists and financial analysts. They'll help predict how these shifting policies could affect regional economic stability. Will China continue its push for economic decoupling, accelerating the transition to a multipolar economic world? Or could Trump's economic policies prompt a greater focus on multilateralism, balancing trade between the US and the rest of the world? Will we see a rise in deglobalization, where countries push for self-sufficiency and reduce reliance on international supply chains? For instance, the pandemic highlighted the risks of relying on global networks, and Trump may take this opportunity to encourage businesses to reshore production in key sectors, from medical supplies to technology. What about you? We encourage you to share your thoughts. What industries do you think could thrive or struggle due to these changes? Will Trump's economic policies lead to a resurgence of manufacturing in the US, or will global markets remain interconnected despite potential protectionist measures? Let's start a discussion in the comments. Trump's foreign policy has always been unconventional. Let's examine how his return might impact ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and the South China Sea. During Trump's first term, the Middle East saw changes like the Abraham Accords, normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations. Will this progress continue, or will Trump's policies reignite old tensions? Some experts believe Trump could push for deeper cooperation with Gulf states, while others fear he might focus more on confronting Iran. His stance on Jerusalem and his maximum pressure campaign against Tehran had dramatic effects. Will this hardline approach resume? One of the most unpredictable aspects of Trump's foreign policy was his relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump's first-term diplomacy with North Korea led to historic summits and promises of denuclearization. But with North Korea continuing its missile programs, how might Trump approach the regime in his second term? Will he continue his charm offensive, or take a more aggressive stance, ramping up sanctions and military pressure? The upcoming years could see either a thaw in relations or a re-escalation of hostilities. Trump's return could alter the balance of support for Ukraine in its war with Russia. During his first term, Trump was criticized for his lenient stance toward Russia and President Vladimir Putin. However, the war in Ukraine has made global support for Kyiv a central issue. Will Trump take a harder line, or will his America First rhetoric mean a withdrawal of U.S. support for NATO's involvement in Ukraine? His prior criticism of NATO raises questions about his commitment to the alliance's collective defense. Some analysts believe Trump's tough stance on trade could lead to tighter sanctions on Russia, further isolating the Kremlin. Another key area of concern is the South China Sea, where China has been expanding its military presence. Under Trump's previous administration, the U.S. frequently sent naval ships through the disputed waters to challenge China's territorial claims. How might Trump respond to China's growing influence in this region? Will he increase U.S. military presence and support for countries like the Philippines and Vietnam, or de-escalate tensions to focus on economic issues like tariffs and trade wars? Some military analysts argue that his administration's stance on China could lead to heightened military confrontations in the South China Sea. Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, JCPOA, in 2018, was one of his most controversial foreign policy moves. Since then, tensions between the US and Iran have escalated, particularly with Iran's progress on nuclear capabilities and frequent military skirmishes in the Middle East. A second Trump term could mean further isolation of Iran, renewed economic sanctions, and even military strikes on Iranian facilities. Alternatively, Trump might opt for back-channel negotiations or a tougher stance on allies pushing for diplomacy with Tehran. Trump's foreign policy legacy will be defined by his ability to broker peace deals, but also by his rejection of international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord. How might Trump balance the need for alliances with the desire to preserve U.S. autonomy? His return could either prompt a reinvigoration of peace talks, as with Israel and the UAE, or the unraveling of established frameworks if he moves toward isolationism. Allies in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia will be watching closely to see if Trump leans into diplomacy or reverts to a more nationalistic, disengaged approach to global conflicts. What conflicts do you believe will be most affected by these changes? Share your insights below. Your opinions matter to us and help create a vibrant community of thinkers. In today's digital age, public perception plays a crucial role in shaping geopolitics. For a figure like Donald Trump, whose relationship with the media has been both combative and central to his public persona, understanding how his media presence and public image will affect his policies is key to forecasting his impact on global affairs. Trump's relationship with the media is unlike any other modern political figure. Throughout his first term, Trump engaged in a constant battle with the mainstream media. often accusing outlets of bias and framing his presidency as a struggle against fake news. This narrative has continued in his post-presidential political efforts. As he returns to the stage, his use of the media, particularly social media, remains pivotal in shaping his foreign policy decisions. We'll dive into how Trump might leverage media channels to drive his agenda, especially in a world where news spreads instantly across platforms like X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. In a world of fast-paced information, what kind of messages will Trump prioritize to sway both domestic and international audiences? Trump's foreign policy decisions were often influenced by the sentiments of his base, and as he re-enters the political sphere, we're likely to see a similar dynamic. Early 2025 surveys suggest a divided electorate in the U.S. Some voters are pushing for a return to America First policies, favoring isolationism and protectionism, while others fear that a resurgence of such policies will lead to instability on the global stage. How will Trump balance these conflicting views as he reasserts himself on the world stage? Polling data and public opinion surveys are critical tools that help gauge how Trump's return could shape his foreign policy decisions. The polarized electorate means Trump has to navigate between the demands of his supporters, who may favor aggressive action on issues like China and immigration, and the broader international community, which might view these policies with skepticism or concern. For instance, supporters of Trump's foreign policy often favor his tough stance on China, his withdrawal from multilateral agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, and his America First rhetoric. However, this can come at a cost on the world stage, where countries like the European Union or developing nations may not align with his more isolationist approach. In contrast, opponents of Trump's foreign policy tend to argue that his actions led to global instability, especially regarding trade wars, NATO, and the Middle East. They argue that such a direction exacerbated tensions and risks and undermined U.S. global leadership. These tensions could affect how the rest of the world reacts to Trump's return. One of the most powerful tools in shaping public opinion during Trump's first term was social media. Platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook were pivotal in spreading his message to his supporters and engaging in direct communication with the public. This dynamic has not changed since his time in office, and his ability to shape narratives through these platforms could be even more important during his second term. We'll examine how Trump might continue to use social media to shape political discourse, promote his policies, and attack his political opponents. The immediacy of these platforms allows for rapid reactions to events as they unfold, and Trump has already demonstrated his ability to influence public opinion through viral posts and videos. This could translate into geopolitical moves, especially when it comes to controversial international policies. For example, if Trump were to make bold statements on X, formerly Twitter, regarding U.S.-China relations or military actions in the Middle East, these messages would instantly be amplified, influencing both domestic politics and international diplomacy. We've seen how public perception on social media can shift quickly, often pressuring political leaders to adjust their positions. Trump could use this pressure as leverage to shape policy, mobilize support, or even deflect criticisms. The 2024 election season has already shown how divided the U.S. electorate remains. As mentioned, early 2025 surveys suggest two distinct groups: those supporting a return to Trump's America First policies, and those worried about the consequences of that direction on global stability. This split creates a challenging environment for Trump as he navigates his political comeback, with critics warning of the risks of pushing for isolationism, trade wars, and military disengagement, while supporters argue that a tough stance could reinforce U.S. global influence. These domestic divides are not limited to the U.S. border. International perception of the U.S. is also divided, with allies uncertain about how Trump's return might affect transatlantic relationships, security alliances, and international agreements. Trump's media presence and his ability to speak directly to the world, whether through speeches, social media posts, or interviews, will impact how foreign governments adjust their policies toward the U.S. Will allies like Japan, the UK, and Australia embrace Trump's rhetoric and policies, or will they pursue alternative paths in foreign policy? Will European countries feel emboldened to challenge U.S. demands, or will they seek to recalibrate their positions in light of his return? Media organizations, both domestic and international, will play a significant role in how Trump's policies are framed and received. Coverage of his foreign policy decisions could influence global attitudes toward the U.S. For example, if Trump's foreign policy leads to greater tensions with China, Russia, or Iran, how will media in those countries portray his leadership? Will they fuel narratives of conflict, or will they downplay the risks of a new Cold War? The media will also influence U.S. public opinion on global issues like climate change, human rights, and international trade. The way international conflicts and U.S. foreign policy are covered could shape public support for Trump's actions or rally opposition. Now, in your opinion, what area of influence do you believe will be most affected by Trump's decisions? Share your insights in the comments below. Trump's return to the political stage has the potential to reshape the global geopolitical landscape in profound ways. In this analysis, we will explore the long-term implications of his policies and how they could influence not only the US, but also the broader international order. From shifting alliances to economic transformations, Trump's approach could lead to a fundamental reordering of global power structures. One of the most significant long-term consequences of Trump's return could be the redefinition of the balance of power among global actors. Under his leadership, the US has already demonstrated a preference for unilateralism and a retreat from multilateral agreements, such as the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal. This pattern could continue, influencing the way the US engages with both allies and adversaries. One of the most crucial shifts is likely to come in US-China relations. If Trump returns to the White House with a similar aggressive stance on trade and security, it could further exacerbate the ongoing tensions between the two largest economies in the world. Analysts predict that a prolonged US-China trade war could accelerate the decoupling of their economies, pushing both nations to diversify their trade and supply chains. Over time, we might see the global economy move away from a China-centric model, with countries seeking new trade partners and emerging economic hubs. Trump's relationship with Russia remains another key area of speculation. During his first term, Trump's administration was often criticized for its perceived leniency toward Russian President Vladimir Putin. Should Trump return to power, this could have lasting effects on NATO and US-European relations. European nations, already wary of Russian aggression, could be forced to recalibrate their defense strategies based on Trump's policies, creating potential divisions within the Western alliance. The EU's relationship with the US under Trump is likely to face more strains, especially when it comes to trade, defense spending, and environmental policies. If Trump continues to pursue protectionist policies, such as imposing tariffs on European goods, the EU may seek alternative economic partnerships, potentially strengthening ties with China or other emerging markets. However, this could also lead to a push for greater European autonomy in foreign policy, reducing dependence on the US. While traditional alliances may face strain, new alliances could emerge as a result of Trump's policies. His America First approach often saw him pull away from long-standing agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and Paris Climate Accord. However, such actions may provide space for other countries to step into leadership roles, filling the void left by US disengagement. In the Middle East, the Abraham Accords, which were signed during Trump's first term, marked a major shift in Arab-Israeli relations. The normalization of relations between Israel and several Arab nations could be expanded in Trump's second term, creating new regional partnerships. However, these alliances may be tested by rising tensions with Iran, and Trump's policies toward Tehran could either solidify these new relationships or lead to fractures in the coalition. Trump's policy of pushing China out of global institutions might create opportunities for other countries in Asia to step up. Countries like India, Japan, and South Korea may find themselves playing more prominent roles in regional security and trade, potentially leading to the creation of new multilateral frameworks. However, if Trump reverts to aggressive protectionist measures, this could undermine US relations with its Asian allies, pushing them toward China and other emerging markets. The future of US-Latin America relations remains uncertain. Trump's policies, such as his stance on immigration and trade, have often been contentious with Latin American countries. With his return to office, we may witness either a reinforcement of existing policies or a shift toward enhanced cooperation with regional countries, particularly concerning issues such as drug trafficking, economic development, and security. Trump's economic policies will have lasting consequences for the global economy. The long-term effects of his trade policies, tariffs, and approach to international economic cooperation are still unfolding. The continuation of Trump's tariffs and trade wars would likely result in a more fragmented global trade system. Countries may seek to establish alternative trade agreements that bypass the US and its tariffs, leading to the rise of new trade blocs. For instance, the EU, China, and India may form more integrated trade networks in response to the breakdown of US-centric trade systems. The ongoing decoupling between the US and China could accelerate under Trump's leadership, as both countries pursue separate technological, economic, and trade interests. This would likely create a bifurcated world economy, with countries aligning themselves either with the US or China, depending on their economic and geopolitical interests. Industries like technology, manufacturing, and energy could be reshaped by these realignments, affecting global supply chains and investment patterns. Trump's economic nationalism could lead to a reshoring of American manufacturing as he continues to promote policies that bring jobs back to the US. This could trigger a global reshuffling of supply chains, with other countries looking to increase their own manufacturing capacities to meet global demand. As a result, we might see an increase in competition for investment in industrial infrastructure and advanced manufacturing technologies. Trump's return could also have profound effects on global institutions like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, WTO, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. His previous disengagement from multilateral organizations and his criticism of international agreements raised concerns about the future of global cooperation. Trump's skepticism of the WTO could lead to further challenges in maintaining global trade standards. His decision to withdraw from agreements like the TPP could push countries to form regional trade deals that exclude the US, weakening the country's influence over global trade norms. In response, other powers like China or the EU may seek to lead efforts in reforming these organizations, potentially reshaping the future of global trade governance. On the environmental front, Trump's rollback of climate change policies has already caused significant setbacks in international efforts to combat global warming. With his return to office, countries like the EU and China may step up to take the lead in climate negotiations, potentially leaving the US isolated from future international environmental agreements. In the long run, Trump's legacy on global geopolitics will likely be defined by his approach to nationalism, trade protectionism, and military disengagement. His America First rhetoric, while appealing to certain segments of the US electorate, could lead to a more fractured and less cooperative international system. This could result in a world where global institutions are weaker, and the major powers like the US, China, and Russia compete for regional dominance rather than cooperate on global challenges. However, Trump's approach could also set the stage for a new geopolitical order, one in which power is less centralized in Western institutions and more diffuse across a range of regional actors. This shift could result in a world that is less reliant on the US as the primary global leader and more focused on localized strategic partnerships. The long-term consequences of Trump's return are still uncertain. The future geopolitical landscape will depend on how Trump's policies interact with shifting global realities. Will his approach continue to deepen divides between the US and the rest of the world? Or will it spark a new era of nationalistic cooperation among rising powers? Only time will tell. As we close this exploration into the seismic shifts in global geopolitics, one thing is clear: the world is entering a period of profound uncertainty. Donald Trump's return to the political arena promises to reshape international relations in ways that will have long-lasting consequences, not only for the US, but for the world. The future of geopolitics in a Trump era is not one of simple predictability. The next chapter in global history could see the continuation of nationalist policies, further economic decoupling, and a shift away from multilateralism. Alternatively, Trump's leadership could encourage realignments in the international system, creating new opportunities for countries to strengthen bilateral relations and pursue national interests more aggressively. One of the core uncertainties lies in how the US will interact with emerging powers like China and India. Will the tensions with China escalate into a full-blown trade war, or could there be moments of unexpected cooperation? How will Trump navigate challenges from Russia and the European Union? And perhaps most importantly, how will global leaders respond to Trump's emphasis on America First policies in a world increasingly interdependent? Economic implications, especially regarding global trade patterns and manufacturing shifts, will undoubtedly continue to reverberate. As nations like China, India, and the EU adjust their strategies to cope with US isolationism, we could see a reordering of global economic alliances, one that favors regional cooperation over global consensus. While the geopolitical landscape appears uncertain, it's important to remember that international relations have always been in flux. Global powers rise and fall, alliances shift, and new economic partnerships form out of necessity. Trump's presidency may accelerate some of these shifts, but it may also spark new avenues for diplomacy and global cooperation that we haven't yet imagined. The question remains, what does all this mean for global stability? Trump's return could usher in a new era of unpredictability, where nations must continually adapt to changing policies and strategies. But it could also be a time of innovation and new power structures, with countries seeking to balance national interests with the demands of an increasingly interconnected world. As global citizens, it's crucial to stay informed and engaged as these geopolitical dynamics unfold. What happens in the coming years will shape the world we live in for generations to come. It's up to us to watch, analyze, and adapt to the evolving political landscape. Join the conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you see the future of geopolitics evolving under Trump's leadership? Do you think his return will strengthen global alliances, or will it further divide nations? Share your predictions, concerns, or hopes in the comments below.